Part 3, the alchemical period. Now, a couple of millennia ago, some stuff happened. For example, there was this rabbi who decided he was going to suggest that people shouldn't go around killing other people quite so much as they were used to. And so what did they do? They killed him because human beings. And a bunch of people made some religions around him, and there were quite a few, really, and only a few of them survived. And I'm not sure that he would have been terribly happy about this, at least about which one survived, but never mind. And then we had Constantine converting to one of these religions, and we had the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, and the mindset changed. And a number of things became considered bad and pretty much went away for a while, including bathing, medicine, universities, science, reason, and all that happy stuff. And some people call this the Dark Ages, and then serious historians come by and make little picayune points about how the dark ages didn't really happen. And people talk about the Middle Ages, and that's kind of weird because when people use words like middle, it usually means that they don't know what to call them and that they probably don't know what they're talking about. I call this the alchemical period, and that's based on alchemy. Some people I've heard call it the metaphysical period, which is sort of okay. But I call it the alchemical period because the alchemists had a certain view of the universe. I hate to disappoint American readers of Harry Potter, but it's not the Sorcerer's Stone, it's the Philosopher's Stone. And it was a substance that people were looking for, or a thing, or a whatever. Maybe it was the Holy Grail, some people believed, that was capable of transforming base metals into gold. But this was a metaphor. It was really supposed to make people immortal. And the metaphor was that, well, base metals corrode, but gold doesn't. Gold doesn't rust. It sticks around forever. And all of their work was kind of about that. For example, they did some work with alloys, but they weren't really trying to get stronger alloys for industry. They were interested in what they called the marriage of metals. And so their idea really was that this thing that I laughingly call reality is an imperfect reflection of a spiritual world, whatever that means. Now, that is quite a lot better as a model of cognition than what we normally have nowadays. Because if they'd gone just a little bit further and recognized that the spiritual world was in their heads and was consisted of the idealized cognitive models that people use to reflect reality or to understand reality, and that really the reality and the models don't really correspond very well, and they have to do with a lot of things that's inside your head, they would have gotten it about right. We talk about things like color, for example. Color doesn't exist in the real world. What exists in the real world are energies of individual photons, whatever those things are. Some people call them wavelengths, and again, that's a very vague human brain type approximation to what's going on, because they're not really waves, they're not really chemicals, waves, they are something else, and it's very easy to remember and use the mathematics for it, but they just don't fit into our heads. We can't understand them at an intuitive level. Now, I'll give you another example. You are not seeing me move. Your brain constructs motion from a series of pictures, individual snapshots that are shown to your eyes and somehow get to your brain if you're lucky. And your brain constructs the idea, the idealized cognitive model of motion from these images. And there's specialized wetware in our brains to do that. And it works pretty well. Most of the time it keeps us from getting killed, which is really the only reason anything is in the brain in the first place, to aid survival and, if you're lucky, reproduction. But motion is a very difficult thing to say exists in the real world. And this is why, for example, people inevitably get the two-slit experiment wrong and don't understand the quantum mechanics behind that, because our brains understand motion in a particular way, which happens to be pretty good for if you're chasing a prey animal and you want to decide whether it goes to the left or the right of a tree. It's good for that. Not so good for electrons or photons or anything that is small. And oh, by the way, everything that we can possibly say about logic or reason or mathematics is interpreted using that specialized wetware. So that wetware is used for a lot of different things. The reason your brain is wrinkled is to get more of that, because these structures are at the surface of the brain. And they work kind of like, if you're familiar with cellular automata or maybe video games or even animated GIFs, they're kind of a little bit like that. I can't tell you what they are exactly except by giving you the neurological explanation. So I have to use metaphor. But it turns out that we use metaphor to understand practically everything. And these structures are also used quite literally for feeling. That is, the feeling that I get when I do this, and I can feel what I'm doing on my hand. And that's because every nerve ending is ultimately connected to something on the surface of the brain. And you can find images of this where it just shows you a picture of half the body on the surface of the brain that gives you an idea of where things are mapped. It looks like a very distorted homunculus. So anyway, the basic understanding of cognition that the alchemists had was pretty good. And during this period, we had a number of really great writers. And I know about some because I de facto minored as an undergraduate in Spanish literature from about the 11th to the 16th centuries. But I have to admit that an English writer, Shakespeare, was really, really good. Of course, you'll get some people arguing that Shakespeare's plays weren't by Shakespeare, but by another guy with the same name, as Terry Pratchett quipped. But never mind, he got a lot of stuff good. A lot of stuff right, and it was very good. And one of the plays that he wrote was called The Merchant of Venice. And a lot of people, they see the anti-Semitism, but, being Jewish, I'm used to that. And they miss the underlying statements about mindsets, because, what everybody knows, the pound of flesh and, oh, mean Jew, but two of the women in the play, who of course are actually men because actors were all men and they dressed up in drag, well, they kind of dressed up in inverse drag to become just judges. And There was a great speech that goes from memory, so I might get it a little bit wrong. The quality of mercy is not strained. It falleth as the gentle rain from heaven. And that's actually a very interesting concept, because what does strained mean? Does it mean like straining? And I think probably not. I think probably what it means is straining, as in a strainer or sieve. That is, mercy just flows. It is not strained by, e.g., logic or reason or a rigid legal interpretation. And that goes back to the old struggle between law, which was of the king, and equity, which was usually of the church. And the word chancellor is an equity term. Well, equity, what are they? Law is, well, the king says you do something, and you do it. And equity is, well, it's got to be fair, and it's got to be proportional. And so here we have a case where law is all reason, but all of the proportionality, all of what is rational, is in a separate system of the chancellor for equity. And for it, dating back at least to Henry the Seventh, we have the idea of habeas corpus. And habeas corpus is an equitable challenge to a legal detention. And of course, we don't really have it at the federal level anymore. Thank you, Little Willie Clinton. But never mind. They had a good intuitive understanding of the concept of the rational, the proportional and proportionate, the idea that there has to be some sort of balance, not just rigidly taking the law and applying whatever it says, but using some good sense to do it.